I'm going to tell you exactly how to answer behavioral questions during an interview. What is going on, folks? Welcome to another video. My name is Alex. If you want to know more about business and product management, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any of the new videos. I did a first video on how to answer behavioral questions for product managers. Today I want to do a follow-up to that video to get into a little bit more detail about what to do and what not to do and some things that I've seen in the hundreds of interviews that I've conducted. We're going to go through some red flags and some signals that we want to see in candidates, and we'll try to tackle some examples and maybe some real-world questions which you can expect to get. So I should say this is going to be a little bit more of a lengthy analysis, but I feel like behavioral interviews are very misunderstood and people have a lot of anxiety about them and apprehension, and I think that that's completely misplaced. But at the same time, there's a lot of misinformation and I think people overthink it. As a result, I think this could be useful for folks. So this is going to be a longer video. I encourage you to take some brief notes, but more importantly, I want you to take some of the things that we talk about and put them into action as soon as possible. That's going to be crafting these stories, that's going to be practicing, recording yourself, all of this stuff. If you're in the phase where you're going through these interviews now, or soon in the future, I recommend that you put these steps into action. If you want to see more content like this, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any of the new videos. And of course, smash the like button and let's get started. Okay, the first thing right off the bat, behavioral questions are not the type of questions that you can answer without practice. You can't come in cold and expect just to leverage all your massive experience in the interview. This is not something you want to improvise. The reason is, it's number one, very easy to make a misstep and say something wrong. We'll cover those cases in a little bit. But it is equally easy to not provide the right signal for the interviewer. If you're the candidate, the whole purpose of this interview for you is to make it easy for the interviewer to say good things about you. To get more specific, we want the interviewer to say good things about you in relation to how the company operates, what this position calls for, or anything else that's specific to the company. But all in all, behavioral interviews are meant to figure out, what are you like as a candidate? What are you like as an employee? What are you like as a team member? What are you like as a leader? What is it going to be like to work with you on your team or an adjacent team? What are you like in a crisis? What are you like in different types of environments? And it's very difficult to get that accurately. And you want to do the best job you can of making it easy for the interviewer to actually say, oh, this person would do well in a crisis, or this person would do well in a crunch, or I'd like to work with this person. I'd like to build something with this person. That's the takeaway that you want the interviewer to have. So have that as just your kind of core mission going into a behavioral interview. Knowing that, you must prepare. And preparation for behavioral interviews means you are going to be scanning your experience. And if you have a lot of work experience, then great, go through all of your work experience and try to gather relevant anecdotes which are going to answer some of these common questions. Wear the hat of the interviewer. If you were trying to hire somebody for a position, if you could know anything you wanted, what would you want to know? You would want to know how they handle success, how they handle failure, how they work on a team, how they manage others, how do they lead without authority, what is their philosophy in terms of building products, how do they organize themselves, how do they prioritize, how do they deal with problems, how do they deal with others' problems, how do they deal with unforeseen circumstances, with failure? All of these things you would ideally want to know. Now, given you only have a limited amount of time, you're probably going to focus your attention on key aspects. You want to know that this person is going to be reasonable to interact with. They will be compromising. They will be flexible. They will be kind and cordial to their teammates. They will do what's right. They will look out for their team. And there's certain key questions which I'm sure you've heard before and you've seen them listed as the top behavioral questions. And there's a reason why that's so. Because if you were the interviewer, this is exactly what you would ask. Tell me about a time that you failed. It's such an easy question, such an obvious question. Tell me about a time that you succeeded. What was your greatest success? Both of these things, they tell you different things, but they could give you clues about what this person's like to work with and key aspects of their working personality. So like we said before, you've got to prepare. If you have work experience, then take each role that you had and answer these key questions for each of these roles. So that means that your preparation must include you thinking of, writing down, and practicing these episodes, these stories. So if you're ever in an interview and a behavioral question is asked, there's only a few reasons why you wouldn't have the answer already prepared. Number one, you didn't take the time to prepare. You're leaving it up to chance. This is one area where putting in the work will give you the results that you want. So you have to put in this work. You have to prepare this behavioral aspect. Even for folks that have a ton of experience, I still recommend going through this exercise explicitly, where you sit down, you go through your experience, you write down these situations. And then the next step is that you actually record yourself answering this question on video and see if you were the interviewer, what would your takeaway be? If you do those steps, if you put the preparation time in and the rehearsal time in, and you record yourself and watch yourself, I assure you, you're going to knock the behavioral interview out of the park. Let's talk about what it means to make it easy for the interviewer to say good things about you. The interviewer is taking notes on the conversation, and they are going to have to write feedback on how the conversation went and what kind of candidate you were. If they present some sort of qualitative assessments, I think this person would be great on a team, or I think this person is a strong leader, you want to make it easy for them to be able to back up those statements. And that's why your stories are so important, is that you want to give them this little nugget of information that they can take back and actually use as evidence for why they have formulated a certain opinion of you. You follow me here? This is very important. It seems pretty straightforward, but these behavioral interviews, a lot of stuff gets revealed there. There's also another aspect, is different companies, depending on where you're going to work, different companies are going to have different ideals and different things that they care about the most. So read up on a company's mission statement, read up on their core values before you go in for these behavioral interviews. Amazon is going to be entirely different from Google and Netflix. Different values. Don't look for cheat sheets, just actually go and read up their core values. If the company is big enough where you care about getting an offer or not and you're excited about it, read their mission statement, read their core values, try to understand what they're getting at, and see, first of all, if that's a good match for you. You don't want to necessarily go work at a place where the core values don't align with your principles. So assuming that they do, make sure that your answers and your episodes will provide the interviewer with some evidence that they can use to back up why you are a good match for those core values. And if you do, you can definitely write me and let me know how it's going. Or let me know after the interview how things went and whether you were able to use some of these tactics that we talked about. Today we're going to just talk about the rough framework. So you've prepared these stories, you've rehearsed them. And by the way, when I say rehearsed, I don't mean you literally wrote down a paragraph and then you memorized it and rehearsed it. Not at all. I mean you have identified a story that you can then actually recall, and you have an idea of the framework. You have an idea of the flow of the conversation. You're going to describe the situation, you're going to talk about what you did specifically, and you're going to talk about the result. I like to add also the takeaway, which you can then align with some of the values that you want to demonstrate in yourself, with the result being that the interviewer can say, here's the result, and this is why I think this person exhibits this attribute, as backed up by what they did, the action. You see, within the situation, action, result framework already lies the notes that the interviewer could take as a result of this conversation. In other words, from the interviewer's perspective, they can say, because of the result, I can say that this candidate is a good match. And as evidence for that, here is the situation and here's the task, or like, here's the situation and here's the action, or specifically, because the candidate did this action, they achieved this result. That is why I think they are a good fit for us culturally, or they're a good fit for us behaviorally, or they match our values. So real quick, I want to just catch us up on the framework for the questions. When you hear a behavioral question, usually you know you're going to be dealing with behavioral questions. There's going to be multiple during one session, most likely. You know that it's a behavioral question because it asks you either a hypothetical situation or to list something from experience, something you've done, as opposed to all other potential on-the-job type questions. So once you get a behavioral question, you actually write it down, then repeat back or paraphrase back exactly what you heard so that you and the interviewer are on the same page. Then you can take a few moments to remember a situation. And when I say remember a situation, I mean think about your 5 or 7 or 10 prepared stories and see which one or multiple of those would work better in there. Therefore, you shouldn't take too much time to think about it and lay out the structure because you roughly know how you're going to do it. So your steps are exactly write down the questions, repeat the question back, think about which story you're going to use, choose a story, briefly describe the situation, talk about what action you took and why, describe the result, and then list your takeaways, if any and if relevant. All right, now let's quickly touch upon some common mistakes that I've seen in the hundreds of interviews that I've conducted. First of all, the story is too long. I don't know what else I can say about this. The details that you're talking about don't add any substance to the discussion. They don't give the interviewer any information about what you are like to work with. They don't give the interviewer any evidence to back that up, and they just waste time. How to avoid this? Prepare your questions. 9 times out of 10, the behavioral questions you're going to get are going to be very, very similar. Now, even if you've prepared your stories, you could still go on too long, especially if you don't have a lot of experience. The cure for this is just to record yourself, kind of like I'm doing right now. Take your phone, set it down, record yourself answering a question. What is your biggest failure? Go. Pick your story, talk about it, and then play it back and listen to yourself. Some important things to keep in mind. How long is the overall story? Is it too long? Is it more than 5, 7 minutes long? Depending on the type of question asked, you could go 3, 5, 7, even longer. But most questions should be able to be answered in 5 minutes. Are you being unclear in the way that you talk or in the content that you reference? Are you being repetitive? Does it look like you are reciting from memory as opposed to recalling? The reason why I don't recommend just purely memorizing a story is because it might then look rehearsed, as if you're literally saying something you've memorized earlier. And you don't want to create that impression. It is okay if you have the general wireframe of what you're going to talk about. That way you're still recalling details as you talk about it. If you're purely reciting what you've rehearsed earlier, word for word, it could come off robotic, and you'll pick that up on the video when you record yourself. It's going to be a little awkward recording yourself, like right now I'm standing in an empty room just talking to myself, but it's going to be worth it because you're going to be able to see things that you would not be able to ordinarily see. You're going to be able to see when you say like, poor descriptors, pause, shuffle, avoid eye contact, or eye contact in this situation is just looking at the lens there in the camera. By the way, I recommend doing this for other interview questions as well, but behavioral ones, it makes the most sense because it's short, concise answers. There's a lot to potentially you need to inventory in your mind, and it's going to give you good returns. The next mistake, the story is incoherent, or it doesn't necessarily make sense, or it makes sense but it doesn't answer the question, or it actually just has no point. Sometimes I've heard stories that don't actually relate to what I was asking or really anything else that could be considered behavioral. So watch out for that and make sure to focus on what point you're trying to demonstrate for the interviewer. Next, this one's a little bit tricky, but every now and then I'll get a candidate that gives me the situation and the action and walks me through the episode, but then the takeaway doesn't match my expectations. As if the logic of what was happening, we see differently. I give one takeaway and the candidate gives me another takeaway. And to watch out for that, you just have to make sure that the takeaway from your story logically matches your actual story. If you record yourself, you'll see what I'm talking about. And another mistake that happens that's similar to this one is that there were no learnings that the candidate took away from the experience, or the learnings were irrelevant or not the key ones that I would focus on. And while some learnings are better than no learnings, one mistake I see happen time and time again is that when I say, tell me about a failure, and I hear the situations and actions and what happened as a result, which looks like the candidate is taking responsibility for the failure. But then when I ask, so what did you take away from that? Or if the candidate volunteers, sometimes they give me a takeaway that shifts the blame from them to someone else, thereby invalidating their whole point of saying that they learned from their failures. So be careful that your takeaways and the rest of your story is consistent. And then real quick, this should go without saying, but you have to remember that nobody's perfect and people make mistakes, and it is actually important to own up to mistakes in a behavioral interview rather than try to maintain that you're perfect. Conversely, another mistake that you could make is if your failure is so catastrophic or is a repeated failure, where my takeaway will be that you are the type of candidate that actually repeats the same mistakes over and over, or lets really bad failures take place that were preventable. So be careful the examples that you list. And a final problem that I see happen often with candidates is that the story chosen answers my question, but at the same time identifies a weakness of this candidate in the particular sphere that I am also evaluating them on. So even though in a lot of big companies, behavioral questions are done separately by an interviewer that's just interested in the behavioral part, that's not always going to be the case. And so you'll have interviewers that might infer certain things about your candidacy based on the answers to your behavioral questions. So in a product management case, they might infer something about the way that you make decisions or you prioritize, which you did not intend to provide, but that just happened to come through in the answer. So be careful, because it's not just about all those things that we talked about in a behavioral interview. You're also being careful to showcase yourself in the proper light for the position that you're applying. In our case, product management, but it could be any position. Okay, what did I forget to tell you? Oh yeah, don't worry about this stuff. This should not be stress-inducing. And the way to actually alleviate some of the anxiety that's associated with answering these questions is to practice. If you make yourself a list of 10 stories and then you practice them 5 times and you record yourself once for every story and you watch yourself back, I promise you can have an easy time at any behavioral interview. It's just a matter of practice, being confident that you have prepared for this. And even if the questions are not exactly what you prepared for, you have enough anecdotes and stories that are close and related to some of the questions asked. So you'll be able to find yourself the right story at any given situation. But I also want you to take it as an opportunity to really just have a conversation with this person. And keep this in mind. If you yourself actually match the core values and the mission statement of the company where you're trying to apply, then let that shine through in your answers. Really enjoy yourself in this conversation. I certainly enjoyed that drop. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to smash the like button as always, and of course subscribe if you haven't already, and hit the bell icon to catch all the new videos. If you have any other questions about behavioral interviews or anything else, please make sure to ask them in the comments below. For those folks that are interested in investment, I use Webull and Yoda Bank. Check out the 2 links that I have below to get multiple free stocks from Webull if you're not using that yet, and you'll get free raffle tickets with Yoda Bank. Then let me know in the comments if you want to see product analysis of certain business areas or future technologies or specific products. For instance, fintech. Given that I have a lot of interest in finance, fintech is an area that I wanted to talk about specifically from a product development perspective. So let me know if you have an interest in that down in the comments. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.